Welcome back. I'm Tim Merlander with the Republican Roundtable, and it's good to be back with you again. With me is my co-host, Mark Sullivan. Mark, it's always good to see you.
Yes, good to be back.
It's nice to know that we're getting out of winter. And our special guest is Frank Pafko. Frank, it's good to have you with us again, and thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure to be here, gentlemen.
And we're going to be talking about transportation. First of all, let's cover the kinds of transportation that we normally talk about with regard to commuting.
Okay, the Twin Cities metropolitan area has done a travel behavior inventory.
Okay, we're looking appropriately baffled. What's it?
Okay.
In 20 words or less, right?
It is a survey of the trips that people in the metropolitan area take and the percent that go to individual modes.
Okay.
Obviously, the largest percentage, which is somewhere in the low 80s, are trips by a car.
Okay.
The next, believe it or not, are trips by school buses. That's about 10%.
A lot of kids going to school.
There's a lot of kids going to school. Right. You have also in that same maybe 8% is people walking. You take a trip because you want to walk to the corner, store, down to the park. You also have bicycle trips. That's down in the 2-3%. And then you have transit trips. Transit is about 3% of the total trips taken in the Twin Cities metropolitan. Only 3% of the trips taken in the Twin Cities metropolitan.
You'd think it would be a lot more than that.
It's only 3%. Of the various modes of transit, obviously the regular metro bus is the predominant mode that is taking. But you also have light rail. We have 2 lines of light rail transit. That's the Hiawatha. They keep saying the blue line and the gold line.
I can't remember blue line, gold line.
It's Hiawatha from the mall and the airport to downtown and the central corridor between the St. Paul and Minneapolis.
University Avenue. 2
downtowns. That has a subset. That's less than one of that 3%. That's less than 1%. Then we also have a commuter rail line, which runs on regular railroad tracks.
That's the North Star,
and that's the North Star line that goes from Big Lake to downtown Minneapolis.
And obviously we're not counting the 2 that they're proposing yet to Southwest.
Not yet.
And was it the Botno?
And
I think
the
they're talking
Botno
to
line,
the continuation up the northern part of
up
the
to
city.
the Target corporate campus in Brooklyn Park.
Yeah.
So so most people commute by car, a number auto or truck. Those are those trips, and the remainder
by highway.
By highway,
yes.
But less than 1% of all of the trips in the Twin Cities metropolitan area is by some sort of train, either light rail or commuter rail.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yes.
Now, why does our establishment, I don't know what else to call it, of politicians, love light rail so much? Can you answer that?
They want to be like Europe, right?
In some cases, they want to be like Europe, or they want to be like Portland, Oregon, or they want to be like Houston, Texas.
Right.
But light rail transit, which is still essentially 19th century technology.
It's upgraded trolleys is about what it is.
Upgraded electric trains is very good for running between point A and point B and back again when you have a large density of people that want to travel between those 2 points.
Point A and point B.
Now, one thing we want to discuss and make sure we get to it is costs, both capital costs and operating costs. First, let's deal with capital costs.
Capital costs. Light rail transit right now is the most expensive mode to construct. The current cost estimate for Southwest Light Rail, which is coming in at $125 million a mile.
Okay. Now, what's real quick? Do you know what the payback is on it? I mean, like, is it like a 10 cents on the dollar? Or
there
something?
is, from the operation of the train. It is rare. It has never happened for any train, and it is rare for any individual bus line to return a profit over operating expenses. all transit in the Twin Cities metropolitan area must be
operates at a loss.
subsidized by taxpayer dollars.
Right.
In the case of buses, the normal buses, you're probably running into $3.50 to $4 a trip being subsidized.
Okay.
In the case of light rail, it actually drops into maybe like 3 1/4 in doing that. North Star takes the cake at about $20 a trip being subsidized.
Now, is this per passenger?
This is not just per passenger, but per passenger trip. So if we have a North Star customer getting on in Elk River and going down to Minneapolis,
Let's say Minneapolis, and then you're in the afternoon.
and
you're
$20
riding back.
bucks, the taxpayers give them a $20 bill,
Man,
and
$20
$20 to
back
go home every day.
I'm in the wrong line of work.
That's it. To contrast that, Metro Mobility subsidizes per passenger trip by $24 a trip. But in that particular case, you have someone probably in a wheelchair. You have the driver who is helping them get on and off the bus, and that is comparable to North Star.
Right. And I would say there's a little bit more of a need in that case because you're helping someone who needs assistance.
Absolutely.
Not just helping someone who has ultimate means to get between A and B.
I do not begrudge Metro the Metro Mobility helping the disadvantaged
None of
folks.
us do. Now, what we're going to do, Frank, you were out on 7th Street just recently. And
we were looking at the Riverview corridor, which is a proposal by Ramsey County.
Yes,
now we're going to
basically
take you
West
to the
7th Street.
Riverview corridor, where Max will join you on 7th Street in St. Paul, and you had a discussion as to light rail on that particular street.
And what's being proposed.
I'm Max Reimer, guest host of the Republican Roundtable, and we're talking transportation today. So I have with me Frank Pafko, the transportation czar. We're here talking about the Riverview corridor. Frank, can you tell us a little bit about this project?
I sure can, Max, and thank you for inviting me. The Riverview corridor is a proposed transit line. It is the Ramsey County is proposing it to run from St. Paul Union Depot, or the acronym SPUD, generally down West 7th and to the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. It is a way to kind of cut the triangle for transit users so they wouldn't have to take University Avenue down to the Viking Stadium and then take the Hiawatha line down to the airport. It would make a core kind of triangle of transit lines in the Twin Cities downtown areas. It is in the preliminary analysis stages, something called alternatives analysis.
Okay.
So the Ramsey County Regional Rail Authority is looking at alternative locations and alternative modes, and they are finishing up their studies, and the Ramsey County Board plans to make a decision on the locally preferred alternative probably sometime late this spring or early summer. The modes are, it could be a full-blown light rail transit, such as is down University, Avenue between the downtowns. It could be a modern streetcar system, a little slower speed, but still on a city street with stop where they have to stop for stoplights. Probably a little more practical than LRT. They could do a separate bus rapid transit. They could actually make a separate bus rapid transit line. That may or may not be down West 7th. They could utilize some adjacent railroad corridors. But there's also what was just recently done on Snelling Avenue between Rosedale and then running across Ford Parkway to the line, which is called BRTA for arterial, which means they run nice new buses at a higher frequency down existing arterial streets such as West 7th, and that would run. It would not stop every block as normal buses do, but might have a bus stop only at 1/2 or 1/4 mile intervals.
Now, Frank, whenever we talk about these new public transportation projects, they're always proposed with a problem in mind that they need to solve, right? So when we talk about Southwest Light Rail, the proposition really kind of solves, or supposedly solves, a problem of commuting from downtown to the southwest suburbs. In this case, what problem does this solve, or what problem do they say that it's supposed to solve?
Ramsey County is proposing that this corridor is underutilized by transit. There is currently a Metro Transit bus line, the 54 line, that runs down West 7th and ends up at the airport. But primarily they are looking for a major public transit investment to fuel redevelopment of the areas. One of the alternatives as you go farther down West 7th is when you contact the railroad spur that goes to the old Ford plant. They are planning on redeveloping that, a gorgeous spot, a lot of acreage along the Mississippi River. And so one of the alternative locations is, instead of going straight across the Mississippi River on a new bridge and then under Fort Snelling, a costly and problematic construction problem, it could run up that old railroad line to the Ford plant and then cut across on Ford Parkway.
It's a lot of real estate.
It is. It would cut across on Ford Parkway, the Ford Bridge, and then hook up with the Hiawatha line LRT at the 46th Street station.
Okay. Now, with this specific corridor in mind in St. Paul here, we saw a lot of impact on the small business community, especially on University, when they put the light rail in and decided to go with that project. We see signs along the street here that say, we are absolutely against the 7th Street light rail.
Yeah.
What kind of impact do you predict that this will have on small businesses in this area?
This is another arterial street, commercial district with a lot of old family businesses and ethnic businesses, and it's redeveloping with similar types of businesses. They are going to, specifically if it is a light rail transit, you will have a 2+ year construction problem. It will be the same impacts as occurred on University Avenue. You will see a lot of these businesses going under and being replaced with public subsidized high-rise residential development and other subsidized redevelopment opportunities.
Talking about the cost of projects like these, we see other models that kind of show us how many millions of dollars per mile go into, especially the light rail projects. What would something like this cost? You mentioned many different modes of transportation. Right. You mentioned the light rail, you mentioned an enhanced bus line, you mentioned a regular bus line. What are we talking in terms of cost for a project like this?
When we look at the current proposals for Southwest and Bottineau LRT, they're coming in at $125 million a mile.
Now that's taxpayer money.
That's all taxpayer money.
Just clarify.
All taxpayer money. They're hopeful that half of it will be paid by the federal government and half of it will be paid by local sources.
Okay.
This route is about 8 miles long, so you're talking about $1 billion, give or take. But because they've got a very expensive half mile to a mile in there. They have a high bridge across the Mississippi River. It will need to be separate. They will need to tunnel under the Fort Snelling area and then hook into the airport proper. So I think you are looking well in excess of $125 million a mile for LRT. If you downscope to a modern streetcar, which would still put tracks down this. 2 years ago, St. Paul was estimating $60 million a mile for this line. If you go to a bus rapid transit system on a separate alignment, there is currently the Gold Line, which runs from St. Paul out to Woodbury. Those estimates are coming in at $45 million a mile. BRT in regular traffic, The Orange Line was built from Dakota County to the Mall of America for about $20 million, $10 to $20 million a mile. And the Snelling Avenue BRT the A line, came in at about $4 million a mile. And that's because all they're using existing streets, they're just buying new buses and putting in some new bus stops at about quarter, half-mile intervals.
And I think most people can get on board with something like that for public transportation, and I'm a little bit biased myself. After all, this is the Republican Roundtable. I just wanted to make mention every single light rail project that we have put in this state has been severely underutilized. The only time that we see a good occupancy in downtown Minneapolis is during the Twins games, during the Vikings games, for instance. You know,
all public transit is subsidized to some degree. But because LRT eliminates some bus ridership, concentrates it, fare box revenues at best turn out about a third of the cost of operating.
Okay.
So,
and it never becomes profitable at that point.
We have never seen a public transit line pay its operating expenses, let alone pay off the capital costs.
So why spearhead a project like this? Why does Ramsey County pursue something like this when there is no provable model for a good amount of revenue? It never becomes profitable, and ultimately you're going to see a lot of these businesses shut their doors in the process. How do you justify something like this?
I don't think you can justify something like this.
Okay.
I have been using my my transportation czar persona on the Up and Adam podcast to argue against expending these large capital-intensive public transportation. I have been opposed to Southwest, LRT, and Botno. I think I like BRT, but I think the gold line is way overpriced at $45 million a mile. I much prefer something like the Orange Line or the A Line, which is a much more frugal way to provide good transit service to the public. Ramsey County commissioners in particular are looking at the, quote, redevelopment potential of a major transit investment, because once you put that major transit investment, then they can get the Met Council and themselves and the cities to publicly subsidize some redevelopment potentials and clean up the corridor, get the new urbanism,
Yes, of course.
In my youth we called them, yuppify the neighborhood.
Very interesting. So for this project specifically, for this corridor specifically, what's next? What happens next? Is it an imminent project?
No, it is well off. No financing has been identified for the project. They're in literally the first steps. They are coming up with a locally preferred alternative. Then they will make an application to the Federal Transit Administration to see if they could get into their New Starts program. They could then not necessarily get some federal money, but at least have the opportunity, have the potential of getting federal money in the future, and then they would start putting in local taxpayer dollars into doing the environmental work and the engineering work in more detail to eventually take it to the point where Southwest Light Rail is right now, where they're trying to clean up some opposition, a lawsuit, come up with some local financing hurdles, and get a full funding grant agreement with the Federal Transit Administration, which, upon missing their goal of getting that signed under the Obama administration, may have a much more difficult time getting that under a Trump administration.
I would imagine. Well, Frank, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Max Reimer, Republican Roundtable, here with Frank Pafko. If you live in Ramsey County, I suppose you should probably call your county commissioner.
Yes, you should.
Tim and Mark, back to you.
Welcome back to the studio. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the Met Council's goals and their political motivations, which we think are somewhat hidden, but nevertheless we can see
Yeah, because
transport.
on the video you mentioned kind of a way to redo the whole neighborhood in a
The
sense.
Metropolitan Council, which on the one hand operates Metro Transit,
Right.
and on the other hand, by virtue of federal transportation regulations, is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Twin Cities. As a result of that, they have a role in deciding how federal transportation dollars are distributed.
Now, who has a role?
The Met Council.
The Met Council has a role in
Both
this.
operates and distributes money, which inherently gives them a conflict of interest, because they can take some of the federal transportation dollars that come into the state, and they can decide, is it going to go to roads or is it going to go to transit, and who gets it. So Metro Transit can decide how much of the pot they give to themselves.
Oh, that's nice.
That certainly is. And that is something I know that the state legislature this session is looking at, because they have a number of bills that would alter the arrangement and the governance of the Metropolitan Council.
Do they have enough votes to get it over a veto?
Probably not.
That's what I was
But
afraid of.
there are also a number, besides Republicans, there are a number of DFL legislators that are unhappy with the way the Met Council operates. So there may be some interesting votes on that.
Okay,
come
now the
end of session.
legislators from outstate get to vote on this as well as the people
Yes, they
in
do.
Metro.
Yes, they do, and generally speaking, it's the outer suburban legislators of either party that have problems with the Met Council compared to, let's say, the core city legislators.
Okay. Now, let's deal with some of the political motivations that are hidden. Make sure we cover these because these are fascinating.
Well,
and people are not normally aware of them.
the big transit projects, such as commuter rail, which hasn't been given a whole lot of effort since the North Star, because that has been an obvious failure. Light rail transit is the big one, and things like Southwest, Bottineau, and the potential in the Riverview corridor for light rail is being proposed because when you make a major public investment, as was done in the Central Corridor, they think that it is very attractive for people who normally don't take public transit to get on it, and to attract people and to attract economic redevelopment opportunities.
Now, let me just interrupt you here. How does this all work out in practice?
In practice, while you see a lot of construction and new development, particularly multifamily housing, let's say along the Central Corridor, virtually all of it has had some public subsidies. So not only do they take our taxpayer money and put it into these very expensive light rail lines, they then need to increase the density in order to generate the trips
Generate
and
traffic.
try to justify it.
Justify this.
And then the Met
boondoggle.
Council and other cities, through their housing policies, give tax breaks or tax increment financing or other
subsidies.
Now, there
grants.
is
Build
a
road.
area right on 34th Avenue in Bloomington where American Boulevard crosses
Yes.
them. That's being developed dramatically. All of a sudden, I'm seeing apartment buildings popping up like weeds. And I keep wondering who's going to live in these because the scenery is not all that terrific.
Yes. But
And-
it's on a transit line, and according to our Met Council and our transit planners,
Everyone wants
our
to live
young
there.
millennials only want to live in high-density multifamily in
Sure
the middle
they
of the
do.
city on a transit line.
And
Sure
bear in
they do.
mind, these people are all unelected. Not a
Exactly.
single
That is
one of
true.
them on the city on that Met Council has been elected.
They are all
been appointed.
governmental. They're all governor appointees.
Governor.
Now, we just have a few minutes left. How does a neighborhood on 7th Street in St. Paul feel about this particular
Basically,
light
how are
rail?
they going
They-
to fare in this whole thing?
They're getting screwed, aren't they?
They are. There is a lot of the
Right up
local
my alley.
businesses. It's an older neighborhood, old houses, old commercial strip with family-owned businesses, ethnic businesses, a lot like University Avenue used to be before they were essentially wiped out.
A lot of businesses went out of business.
There is, as our field trips, so there's sign after sign that they do not like light rail. They do not want light rail transit down West 7th. Now, we can say that, yes, downtown St. Paul needs a direct route to the airport and the Mall of America, which the 54 bus line provides now. But to make such a huge investment of 125 million or more, and they're either going to go up on a detour and go up to the new Ford plant, or cut across on a new bridge along the Highway 5 and have to go under Fort Snelling.
Now, when you say under Fort Snelling, is that the present fort or is that the scenic?
It would be on the uphill. If you know where the West 7th Highway 5 bridge crosses right now, and the highway actually goes under in a cut and cover tunnel, so you have the access to the old fort over the top of it.
No kidding.
That is true. And we had a shot that we saw how that went through. The proposal, if light rail would just stay on that line and not detour to the Ford plant redevelopment site, would be to go on the upstream side, the north side of the existing bridge. It would have to probably blast into the bluff at least as deep or deeper than the Highway 5 cut.
Where's the environmentalist on this?
And it would,
they hiding under a rock or something?
And it would need to just miss some old Civil War era barracks that are on. It would not have.
Oh, I'm going to be buried around there when my time comes, so I'm kind of cranky about it.
They are the Minnesota Historical Society, I think, is looking to Ramsey County to do a lot of redevelopment of that site for them in exchange for that kind of proposal.
Oh, that's just wonderful. Frank, we're just about near the end of our time. I do appreciate you taking the time. I just presume that the neighborhood along 7th is highly against this and that they're getting petitions to oppose this as much as they can.
Very much so. There's been a couple of recent public meetings, and the Ramsey County Board, in its role,
they could care less about what the people think.
Well, that they will be making a decision on the locally preferred alternative, which alignment, which mode.
I think now we're going to have to call quits. We're just running out of time. Frank, thank you so much for coming. I've seen this before, and I just hope it doesn't end up the same way. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
You're very welcome.